Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, it's a stack of pages really, from J.M. Coetzee's Summertime, Scenes from Provincial Life.
Yeah, and it's not exactly a straightforward book, is it?
Not at all. It's more like stepping into a mosaic. You've got memories, perspectives, unearthed notes.
Exactly. We have journal snippets, recounted conversations, different voices giving their take on this central figure, the writer himself, sometimes he, sometimes John, sometimes Mr. Coetzee.
And our mission today is basically to explore these fragments, pull out the fascinating details, the insights they offer, not just about this one writer, but about, people, relationship.
And memory itself, how subjective it all is.
Right. We're looking specifically at the 1970s in South Africa through all these different lenses. Okay, let's unpack this. So, the source material itself, it's presented as fragments, notebooks, interviews, memories, all circling around this writer in the 70s.
Right, and that's deliberate.
Yeah.
It immediately tells you, look, this isn't going to be one clean narrative.
No single authority.
Exactly. He's trying to build a picture from these different pieces. And it makes you think, maybe understanding any life means dealing with multiple stories, conflicting stories even, each with its own angle.
Okay, so let's start with the notebooks. These are dated 72 to 75. They feel quite raw, don't they? Unfiltered glimpses.
Absolutely. You get these stark observations right next to very personal thoughts. Like that note, August 72, about the news from Francistown, Botswana.
Oh, yeah, the car driving up, the shooting, 7 charred bodies. It's just stated. Horrific.
Just noted down. No comment, almost. And then right alongside that, you get him thinking about doing one's own dirty work.
Finding pleasure in laying concrete slabs, that honest physical work.
Yeah, the idea that maybe that work will outlast him. That it's a way of, I don't know, cheating death, maybe. He talks about wanting to fall into this profound sleep, tired from honest toil.
That contrast is really something, isn't it? The brutal external reality, the political violence, and then this very internal, almost meditative thought about simple labor.
It says a lot about that tension, inner world, outer world.
And there's the politics again with the note about Breitenbach leaving South Africa, marrying a non-white woman.
Being given temporary white status, just so he could visit his own country.
And the note is explicit about the envy. White South African men envying his freedom, his ability to roam, and it mentions his beautiful, exotic sex companion.
It's such a sharp insight, isn't it, into the kind of psychosexual stuff underpinning apartheid? Personal envy tied directly to the system's restrictions. Breitenbach broke the rules, racially, geographically.
And that sparked resentment.
Intense resentment, yeah, from men trapped in the system they were supposedly benefiting from.
We also get glimpses of his early thinking literary ideas. He mentions Kurosawa's film To Live, about the bureaucrat facing death.
And that little bit about language, the widow.
Oh, right. Insisting notwithstanding the aforesaid must mean no one cannot withstand her claim.
It's fascinating. It shows how powerful emotion rage, greed, in her case, can completely warp how someone reads language, even formal legal language. She's bending it to her will. Or her rage is.
He doesn't just dismiss her as wrong, though. He sees her as gripped by these feelings.
Exactly.
There's another note that really grabbed me. Comparing himself, the unemployed intellectual who understood X and Y.
David Truscott, the flourishing marketer across the street, who didn't understand X and Y.
It's pretty cynical, maybe a bit self-pitying.
Maybe. But it definitely holds up a mirror to, societal values. It's saying, look, things like Latin and algebra, intellectual understanding, that's clearly not the path to the nice house, the family, the BMW.
Right. Maybe understanding complex stuff is actually a waste of time if you just want conventional success.
Just add up numbers, press buttons, whatever it is marketers do. It skewers that whole idea that intellectual pursuits guarantee worldly reward.
And later, his thoughts on writing itself show this internal conflict, too. One idea. Books as an axe to chop open the frozen sea inside us.
That's such a powerful image. But then he contrasts it, right?
Yeah, with books as just a gesture of refusal in the face of time. A bid for immortality, but ultimately pointless. When you think about the cosmos, the sun swallowing the earth.
It swings wildly, doesn't it? From literature having this huge, almost spiritual power to it being utterly insignificant on a cosmic scale.
It captures that tension, wanting to create something meaningful against ultimate meaninglessness, maybe.
Yeah, I think many writers feel that.
Okay, let's shift gears. From his private notes to someone who knew him, intimately, Julia. Her perspective on their affair is really striking.
It is, and she's so upfront about her memory, isn't she? Saying she's making it up as they go along with the dialogue.
But insists it's true to the spirit.
That admission is key. It tells you right away, this isn't courtroom testimony. It's her memory, her truth of it, shaped by time.
She sets the scene married to Mark, who traveled, had affairs, her own social circle with his colleagues' wives. She felt a bit superior, cold and supercilious.
And she talks about that weird system of the licit illicit.
Yeah, what was that about?
She saw it as this, dark social game. Affairs were common but hidden, a kind of hypocrisy she found suffocating. It provides the context for her own affair, really.
Her first meeting with John sounds awkward.
Definitely. Bringing brownies while he's house-sitting for his dad, not invited in, noticing his bad teeth, him asking about dinner, then having to check with his father first.
Even that tells you something, doesn't it? The awkwardness, maybe a lack of social grace, and his father's presence, even when not there.
Right. She describes the relationship itself as John being infatuated, but her feelings were, well, mixed.
She felt she was behaving like a whore, she says, but also quite proud of the effects she had. She glimpsed this potential for growth without end in the realm of the erotic.
So for her, it seems it was less about him specifically and more about her own sexual awakening, her power in that situation. Not really a love affair from her side, maybe?
That really comes through when she talks about the sex. His sexual mode was impersonal, she says, like he was engaged with an erotic image or woman with a capital W.
Yeah, that's a strong claim. And her later diagnosis, using the phrase autistic quality, that's pretty harsh.
What does she mean by that, exactly?
She clarifies it was about this inability, as she saw it, to connect with her as a person in that moment, treating people like mysterious automata. It made the sex feel, for her, like it lacked all thrill.
Wow. And there are these specific kind of painful moments she recalls. Her family name Kiss, leading to teasing. And that Schubert music incident.
Oh, that's just excruciatingly awkward, isn't it? Him playing the music, trying to keep time.
Telling her to empty your mind and feel through the music, trying to make love by the number.
And she tells him to go home and practice your wooing. Ouch.
She calls it a sore spot for him. It becomes her prime example of his disconnect. Mistaking his mistress for a violin, basically. Approaching intimacy like a technical problem.
Rather than an emotional, physical thing.
Yeah. She also talks about how her own affair shifted her view of her husband's cheating. It started as tit for tat.
But then her own experience felt like a mistake. And it made her see his infidelity in a new light. Less simple judgment, maybe.
Yeah, and the shame of being found out, hitting her moral limit, it's quite a nuanced reflection on her own ethics.
Experiencing it herself gave her a different perspective.
Looking back, her view of John is complex. He was important, she says, a friend who could lift her spirits. She even admits he raised her to unexpected erotic heights once only.
So not a total write-off.
No, but her final judgment is pretty blunt. Wasn't made for love. Like a glass ball, no way to connect.
She felt he was radically incomplete even then, but she was young, caught up in it all, an erotic entanglement, she calls it, not a love affair. She couldn't analyze it properly until later.
And she has this odd thought, doesn't she, that if he'd been more forceful, impetuous, imperious, maybe he could have saved her from her bad marriage.
That's a strange hypothetical. And she also challenged him on the practical stuff, right? Economics.
Yeah. Told him he needed someone else to do the paid work, lay the concrete, so he could have leisure time to write books.
That's her very practical viewpoint, clashing with his intellectual life again, highlighting the money reality behind his pursuits.
But despite all the criticism, she does look back with some affection. Says he taught her a lot. It's definitely layered.
Not just a simple dismissal.
Okay.
So, moving from that intense entanglement to family, his cousin Margot, remembering Christmases on the family farm, Bulfontein.
And right at the start, she objects to being called she by the interviewer.
Yeah, that little detail reminds you this is filtered. Someone else is telling her story, and she notices.
She paints this picture of diminished family gatherings, John's sort of awkward presence there, rumors swirling about him, American jail, disgrace.
The family didn't know how to handle a potential criminal, unlike a bankrupt, which they understood better.
Right. And his sister, Carol, apparently thought he was affected and supercilious, so family judgment, suspicion. It followed him home. Margot herself, though, is described differently. Too soft, cries easily, tender-hearted.
Which makes her later quite sharp observations about the family and about John even more striking.
We hear about specific moments. The vegetarian comment.
Dies nien word wervan ek huni. That's not a word I like.
And the family just stares. And his deep connection to the Karoo landscape, it spoils me for life, understanding the baboon there.
That connection to the place is a real bond between them, it seems. And that comment about Merweville being able to speak with the dead there, it's quite haunting.
That trip to Merweville they took seems really important. Learning about his grandfather, the mayor, the go-getter with spunk.
Unlike the later generations, apparently, in John's childhood wished to be buried there just till I come out again.
Yeah.
Weirdly hopeful.
Then the car breaks down, and John, the unprepared city boy, has no torch, no matches.
Back to the practical incompetence theme.
Exactly. And while they're stuck in the dark truck cab, Margot has this reflection about the kind of woman attracted to men like him.
What was that again?
Indifferent to silliness, or even sex maybe. Looking for someone to protect. Someone who needs looking after.
That's a piercing thought, isn't it? Seeing him as a sort of project for a certain kind of woman.
And Margot's view of the Coetzee family overall, it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, nonsense family, flighty, without substance. Clowns, a handful of feathers.
Ouch. The uncles didn't prosper. His father, a disgraced, disbarred attorney. She mentions Carol wanting to leave SA to purge her kids of the Coetzee inheritance.
That paints a picture of a legacy, or maybe a perceived legacy, of impracticality, lack of grounding, something to escape from.
And there's direct conflict within the family about John's situation. Carol's take is harsh. Living with his dad, no money, no prospects, ran from the army, kicked out of America, too stuck up.
Living off his father's pathetic salary from a scrapyard.
But Margot pushes back. No, she says he teaches high school. He earns his own money.
It's a perfect example of how family gossip, different perspectives, create totally different stories about the same person.
Despite the family stuff, Margot and John do share that deep feeling for the Karoo. It touches one's soul, she says. They're a tiny minority who feel it.
That shared appreciation is a genuine connection point, a shared language about the land, even if other connections are harder.
The father-son dynamic is clearly tough, past bad blood. The father pretending John was a scientist. Living together is unnatural. John is difficult, wants to be alone.
She figures the whole Merweville plan was just about him wanting to live by himself.
But here's the twist. Margot says her confidence in John actually comes from the respect she sees between him and his father, despite everything.
It's really complex. The tension is visible, but she perceives something deeper in underlying respect that makes her see him differently than the others.
Margot's own life offers a contrast. Happy marriage to Lucas, simple, wholehearted love, but the pain of being childless, her barrenness.
Luke sounds very grounded. Paying workers well, supporting people. The farm is home, not just business. Hard worker.
Yeah, while she's often alone keeping the books. And she contrasts Lucas' warm present with John, who's tense, resists hugs, holds back. Heatless, sexless, she calls him.
So Lucas becomes the benchmark for warmth and presence, and John falls way short in her eyes. Emotionally, maybe physically detached.
She even writes John a letter, giving him advice about marriage based on her bitter experience of sleeping alone. Tells him he needs someone.
That sounds incredibly vulnerable. A plea from her own pain projecting onto him, maybe?
And his reply.
Short. Formal. Cold formality.
Yeah.
It shocks her. And he dismisses the Merweville idea. Now they're back in Cape Town.
Yeah. That detached response just reinforces her view of him as unable or unwilling to connect emotionally.
Seems so.
Then later, her mother gets sick, and Margot has to go to Cape Town and stay with John and his father.
Setting up another revealing scene.
She arrives at the Tokai house. Her heart sinks. It's a mess. Smells bad, dirty bathroom. John gives her his room, sleeps on the sofa. His father seems agitated, tentative around John.
And the house itself.
A farm laborer's cottage, shoddily built, leaking everywhere. John spends his free time fixing things, like the boy with his finger in the dike, trying to hold it all together. And again, she sees John as heatless and sexless.
The state of the house, the father's anxiety. It confirms her sense of their life as precarious, strained, and her perception of John seems fixed now.
Her final critique is maybe the most direct. She feels John doesn't really love his father, maybe doesn't even love himself.
And she asks, what's the point of cutting oneself free of everyone and everything?
Right. He needs commitment, duty, she thinks. Find a woman, welcome his father. She wants to raise with him, give him a good telling off.
She really represents this traditional, community-focused view, and she finds him totally lacking. It's frustration, concern, but seeing him as fundamentally adrift.
Okay, another sharp perspective now. Maria Regina Nascimento, a Brazilian refugee in South Africa with her daughters.
And her story starts with such hardship. Her husband Mario's death, attacked with an axe at work. Her struggles with bureaucracy, bad English.
Needing a despachant. Officials demanding her dead husband's signature. It grounds you immediately in the harsh realities immigrants face.
Definitely. Personal tragedy, language barriers, official indifference.
So she hires Mr. Coetzee, English teacher for her daughter, also Maria Regina, invites him to their flat. The daughters apparently saw teachers as gods.
Which sets up this contrast, right? The daughter's reverence versus the mother's protective, pragmatic view.
And the mother, Maria Regina, gets suspicious quickly, sees him playing with her feelings.
So she confronts him directly. Wants her daughter to learn English for a certificate. That's it. Not for him to play with her feelings or expose his feelings.
Her priority is crystal clear. Survival, her daughter's practical future. She cuts right through any potential ambiguity.
And his response is apparently all about his teaching philosophy. The student's yearning for the truth, teacher and student burning together.
A higher realm. He says the daughter has a feeling for language, might be a writer, which is completely at odds with her focus. Good elocution, good marks.
It's that clash again. His abstract idealism versus her grounded, practical needs. He's talking souls and truth. She's talking certificates.
The picnic incident seems to perfectly capture this. His idea. Go to the mountains in winter.
And he can't even make a fire. The poet who could not even make a fire?
It rains, the daughters lose spirits, and for the mother, it was actually good that her daughter saw what her hero was like in real life.
It completely punctures his intellectual image, doesn't it? Shows his practical incompetence, undermines that godlike status in the mother's eyes. He's just not equipped for the real world.
She even gives him this public admonishment afterwards, thanks him, but says it's not a good idea for a teacher to be favoring one girl just because she is pretty, asks him to reflect.
Wow. Leaving no doubt about her disapproval or her determination to protect her daughter.
Her overall assessment of him is maybe the most damning we've heard. A weak man. Worse than a bad man, she says, because he's helpless before his impulses.
The daughters argue back, Maman, we are all weak.
But she insists she is not weak. Her strength is necessary for their survival. Strength means self-control, ensuring survival. And she finds him totally lacking.
It's a powerful definition of strength born from her own experience.
Then there are his letters, typed, formal, lots of them, after she stopped replying.
And her interpretation?
That he lacked a tutor in love, didn't know how to write a proper love letter, handwritten red roses. She saw it as typically Dutch Protestant.
How so?
Prudently, long-windedly, without fire, without grace. And she suspected his lovemaking would be the same. Cold, passionless, no flair, a cultural reading of his behavior.
Extending it right into potential intimacy. Wow.
Her final verdict is just stark, not made for conjugal life, not made for the company of women, solitary. She felt she was a woman, he was just a boy.
A complete dismissal.
Yeah. How could he, knowing nothing about life, teach her about love? She argued furiously with her daughter about it, called him not a real man.
She sees him as fundamentally immature, ill-equipped for relationships. She, the survivor, understands life and love, not the academic.
And she insists he wasn't in love with her. He was in love with an idea of me, a fantasy of a Latin mistress.
The projection.
Exactly. She wished she'd found another writer, another fantasist. Her view is totally practical. What is going on between this man and my daughter? Because underneath all the fancy words, what men want is usually very basic and very simple.
That's her cutting through it all, seeing his intellectual interests as maybe just a cover for something basic, potentially predatory.
And as a former dancer, she even assesses him physically. By his movement, his bearing, he was disembodied, divorced from his body.
Like a puppet.
Could not dance to save his life.
Adds another layer, doesn't it? His intellectual detachment showing up as physical awkwardness, a lack of grace, not fully present in the world.
And importantly, she refuses to let her photo be used.
Right. Doesn't want people thinking she was one of the women in his life. Because, she says, it was never so. She wants to control her own story. Absolutely. Rejecting being defined by him.
Okay, now let's think about the person doing these interviews, the implied biographer. That voice adds another layer.
Yeah, it becomes meta. Makes you think about how biographies get made, the problems of using these subjective accounts.
He talks about his method using Coetzee's notebooks for clues about who mattered, picking people still alive. Margot found that peculiar.
Which it kind of is, right? The sources are chosen by convenience and the subject's own notes. That automatically creates limits. Potential bias.
And he addresses that bias directly, choosing women who were emotionally involved, Julia, Maria Regina, Margot. Will it be slanted, just women's gossip?
But he says he wants multiple stories from several perspectives.
Yeah.
That's the central challenge, isn't it? Using these intimate stories to get closer while knowing they might be incomplete, biased, maybe reducing a complex life to just relationships.
We also hear him talking with a colleague about Coetzee's career. Adequate academic, not a great teacher, maybe better as a librarian.
The colleague saw him as a misfit, a cautious soul who liked the security of a monthly salary check.
So academic life limited his writing, maybe, but gave him contact with young people.
It's a different angle, a professional assessment, suggesting his academic path was maybe a compromise, stability over pure vocation.
They talk about that joint course in African literature they taught in the 70s. Two white guys doing it because no one else would. Shows the insularity of essay, then.
It was an eye-opener for students, they say, but they didn't attract the more radical black students. Why not?
Because, the colleague says, they weren't radicals ourselves. Their approach was too academic, not engaging enough. He also mentions Coetzee being affected by '68 in the U.S., while he himself saw the Sorbonne events. Different experiences shaping them.
It really places them in that specific political and academic moment, shows the limits of their position from some students' perspectives.
There's that anecdote about Coetzee's job interview. Awkward, no real enthusiasm for teaching, encountering the pipe smoker colleague, who is implicitly the interviewer, right?
Seems so. And that note about the diary entry stopping at white South Africanness, why did it stop? Too complex, too sensitive, or just boring.
Intriguing loose end. Suggests a topic he couldn't or wouldn't fully explore, even privately.
And the final thought from this colleague is pretty stark, too. He didn't feel Coetzee had a strong presence, didn't leave a deep imprint on others personally.
Despite his massive achievements, a Nobel laureate lacking a deep imprint.
It's a fascinating contradiction. Suggests his impact was maybe primarily through the writing, not through personal interaction.
Let's circle back briefly to Coetzee's own inner world, based on what seemed to be his notes. Those diary bits, bad day, asterisks, hinting at struggle, maybe low confidence.
Yeah, these brief, unexplained entries suggest some internal difficulty, even if he doesn't spell it out.
And the father-son thing comes through here, too. His father, the bookkeeper, working late, partly for safety, others taking dangerous trains later.
Treating bookkeeping like a priestly duty, despite no formal training, reverence for the ledgers.
And that difficulty expressing affection, not family practice. He questions if saying I love you or I cherish you would even feel true if he forced it.
That adds so much depth. Their distance wasn't necessarily a lack of feeling, maybe just a cultural, personal inability to voice it, leading him to doubt the feeling itself if it wasn't spoken. And that query about Mrs. Nordian admitting his own attraction while mentioning his father's suggests shared unspoken things.
The Tibaldi record story is so poignant, too, scoring it as a boy, feeling bitterest remorse for years.
Then finding a compilation as an adult, playing it hoping to lure his father out, but his father shows no interest.
But then later he feels his own heart throb with the music. Imagines his father feeling the same back in 1944.
It's such a powerful image of delayed connection, isn't it? Empathy across time, happening internally long after the chance for a shared moment is gone. Speaks volumes about processing family stuff over the long haul.
There are also those reflections on education. His mother's philosophy fostering talent, Montessori Steiner versus the Kuiperists wanting to shape and prune.
And he wonders, did his mother just let them grow up savage because she herself was? Questioning his own upbringing.
So, okay, bringing all these fragments together, what kind of portrait emerges?
It's definitely complex and contradictory. He comes across as awkward, solitary, fiercely intellectual, but maybe emotionally distant, struggling to connect deeply. The relationship with his father is dutiful, respectful perhaps, but not openly warm. And everything is saturated by that 1970s South African context.
And the power of subjective memory just jumps out at you, doesn't it? How differently people see the same person, the same event.
Totally. Julia versus Margot on his sexuality and emotional capacity pulls apart. Carol versus Margot on his character, his prospects. Regina sees weakness, lack of reality. Julia sees him as radically incomplete. Related maybe, but different shades. The biographers left trying to make sense of these different truths.
Each story feels real to the teller, but side by side, wildly conflicting images.
And you really see this clash between his internal life, his ideas about love, freedom, teaching, and his external reality, his actions, his practical abilities. Can't fix the truck, can't make a fire, seen as a poor teacher, a struggle to embody his inner world in a way others understand.
Maria Regina's disembodied description really hits that nail on the head, doesn't it? Divorced from the physical, practical self.
Precisely. And underneath it all, that South African context is always humming. Breitenbach, Francistown, train dangers, refugees, academic insularity, the Karoo, family history. It's the fabric shaping everything.
So why does this matter to you, listening? Well, it's not just about one famous writer, is it?
Not at all. It's a really powerful illustration of how complex human lives are, how differently we're understood by the people we encounter, how full of contradictions and hidden struggles we can be.
It shows the massive challenge and the fascination of trying to truly understand another person. Can we
Yes.
ever really get the full picture from the outside, even with lots of perspectives?
Or are we always just piecing together fragments seen through other people's filters?
So we've taken this journey through notebooks, memories, past relationships, trying to assemble these fragments of a life. And we've seen how one person can look awkward, brilliant, distant, sensual, weak, complicated, simple, all depending on who's talking and the lens they're using.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About how we see others, how we ourselves are seen, and whether anyone ever gets the real story of a life.
Or if it's always, like Julia admitted, true to the spirit, maybe, but not necessarily to the letter.
Hmm.
So here's something to mull over. If the sources closest to a life, the intimate memories, the personal biases, the subjective takes are so full of contradictions, is any biography or really any attempt to understand another person ultimately just, well, just collection of well-told fictions?